All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody. We're live on Facebook. I have Kathy with me. Kathy Robinson is here, and we're going to be interviewing her today. We really hope that Kesha Kent will be joining us, but if she's not, that is okay. We're excited to be able to go live and be on the podcast today and have some wonderful conversations. And I'm really excited. Our show title is talking about what's the turning point in your career for you to do what lights you up. And everyone knows I love to talk about what lights you up. So here we go. We're going to start recording our podcast now. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Lead Up for Women, Speak Up to Lead Up. I am your host, Colleen Biggs. And wow, today is November 4th that we are going live on Facebook. So those of you that are listening to this podcast, you're a few days later. So I'm sure the whole world has changed in 2 days since we've posted this. But today, with our guests that we have, I really wanted to talk about the turning points in our career and what lights us up. And, Kathy and I were talking earlier before we went live and started recording the podcast about showing up and about what lights us up and about having a voice. And, this podcast is called Speak Up to Lead Up for a reason. And the conversations that we have here in a very safe space. And I was very much about women going out and voting this year, no matter what your opinions are, no matter what your votes are. It's about having a voice. And it's been 100 years that other women have fought for us to be able to have that vote. And, when I have a friend of mine who fought for 10 years to become a citizen of the United States. Her husband was a citizen, her children were citizens. She was not a citizen and went through the process to become a citizen. And this was her first year to go out and vote. And she was so excited to have the freedoms and to know that her voice counts. And Kathy, I know you, first of all, Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Kathy Robinson. So before you speak, Kathy, I do want to tell everyone we are both former corporate execs. So when Kathy and I got on the phone, we talked for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, all about what it was like in corporate. And we can both say, yes, it's similar for most people in our positions as corporate executives in corporate and what that feels like. And it's no shock to me that Kathy moved on from that to being a certified wellness coach and the founder of Athena Wellness Enterprises. Now, I have her book. It's an amazing book. I'll give her the opportunity to talk about it today, of the Athena Principles, the simple wellness practices for overworked professionals. It was so needed in this world. And I really feel like until you break those chains and let go of those shackles and move yourself away from corporate, it's very hard to explain to someone what it's like on the other side.
Right.
Wouldn't you say, Kathy?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Well, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So exciting to have you here today. And you talked to me a little bit about your reflections that you were having this morning. Did you want to share with our listeners about what those were?
Yeah, absolutely. I was reflecting on a couple of things. One, just this incredible process that we're going through as a nation with the world looking on now. And, what a gift it is to be able to do that, much to your point, that it really is a privilege to be able to do that. But the insight that I had was more along the process that every ballot cast is really somebody saying, this is my way of being seen. This is my way of being heard. This is my way of being valued. And the insight that I have is that this is what I'm doing now on an individual level with my clients, right? To be able to help them see themselves clearly in whatever stage of life they find themselves in, to be able to quiet some of the noise so they can hear what it is that they need to do, listen to that inner wisdom. And then lastly, how do they value themselves so they can bring their whole selves back out into the world and to be of service? And so it was really this interesting circular thought process that I was having as I was just trying to ground myself. I literally woke up this morning before I looked at my phone or turned on the television. I just put my hand over my heart, took a couple of deep breaths and realized, like, how do I ground myself in the present moment? And this is the insight that started to come. And I'm like, wow, that is really interesting that we all in some way want that, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. How do we do that for each other? No matter what the outcome is, we need to be there for each other because we have to collectively move forward somehow.
Yeah. I completely agree, Kathy. And I think that's just great advice for anyone today who's feeling a little overwhelmed, maybe massively overwhelmed or anxious about what's happening right now in our nation, and not knowing what the outcome is going to be. Grounding ourselves, putting your hand over your heart, stopping for a moment, being silent, and just breathing and giving yourself some space and some room to just reflect and ground. And I love that.
And I
In
think when we do that too, the worry and the fear we realize is in the future.
Mhm.
And the would have, should have's, things that could have been done, regrets are in the past. And you really are in the present moment then. And it's
Mhm.
like, you know what? Right at this moment, I'm fine. My family and friends love me. Nothing has changed dramatically since yet. Like, it's okay. And we are going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it will be what will be. There isn't anything we can do in the present moment to make a change for that. We cast our vote.
Right.
And so here we are, right? Kathy, I love that. Well, let's go back because you have so much advice. And I don't feel like you were always, not that you weren't always a person with advice, but you weren't always a person that concentrated on the wellness and reflecting and being in the moment and grounding yourself. And I'd like to say I think that happens with age only because we just get to a point where we run into a wall. But it would be better for someone to recognize that earlier stages on. And then if they are in that corporate world, how do they find that? I hate the word balance, but
Mm-hmm.
how do they find or create the priorities in their lives that they need to be taking care of themselves and that value in them? And you've been on a long journey, so I'd love for you to take us a little bit back into the past
Sure.
of what your journey was like in corporate America, and where you found yourself before you decided to make that extreme change in your
Sure. Yeah.
world.
I'll give you a high level view and then we can dive into
Love
whatever,
it.
wherever you'd like. So I'll start with, by way of background, just from a corporate standpoint. I've lived in New York City my entire life, just for the record. Graduated from college with quite a bit of debt. And so where I went, my first stop was on Wall Street. I was on Wall Street for 18 years, worked for a number of banks and brokerage houses as an internal audit and as a risk professional. And so after 18 years and being completely burned out, a former boss actually called me and said, "Hey, I just moved to a human capital management company. It was a Fortune 250 company that was based in New Jersey. And would you come join my team?" And so I was with that company for 15 years, the last 7 years as their chief audit executive and their chief risk officer. So it was really a wonderful 33-year career with no regrets. But you used the word lit up before. There wasn't that light. There were things that I loved. I had a global team, a global travel, a lot of responsibilities. I reported to the board. It was a wonderful experience, but I didn't get that internal fire. And so I was always on this quest of what is it? What is it that would light me up? I could never figure out how to make something else into a living. So the transition really came a few years ago. I'm into my 50s now. And I'm like, I asked myself a question I never asked myself. And that is, how do you want to spend your time? Like, put the career aside. How do you want to spend your time? How have you been spending your leisure time? And I spent about a year or so, this was around 2016, 17, of just doing things that interested me. I got into endurance sports. I took sports nutrition, plant-based sports nutrition courses. I got into fitness and just started to play with things that were of interest. And I paid very close attention to, well, how did that make me feel? Did I like it? Didn't I like it? And started to kind of shape something out of all of these different experiences. And so while I was going through that, I was also looking at my bookshelf and found a lot of what I was reading over the years. Yes, it had to do with weightlifting and training and things like that, but there were things on there like writing and spirituality and creativity, nature, meditation. And I'm like, wow, all of this falls under the umbrella of living a good life. Could I do something under that umbrella? And that led me to a Google search that I found wellness coaching. And while I was working, I became a certified wellness coach, started Athena Wellness. and began coaching for free while I was working and wrote the book. So all of that while holding down my full job and trying to come up with some sustainable business model that would actually work. And in working with a business coach, I did find that I could create a portfolio, which was very helpful. And I've been doing this now since I formally retired November of last year. So it's been about a year.
Yeah, that is such a great story. I love it because as women, we tend to just keep going and going and going, right? Like we think there's endless fuel.
Yeah.
Yet we're generally not fueling ourselves, which we just feel like and I- and I don't know. I don't know if God, made us resilient, created our bodies to where they really are, functioning at a higher level because we need it with the energy that we have and how much we're able to do. It's just it's crazy to me the abilities that we have, but because we have those abilities, um, not that we take them for granted, but I hear what you're saying as far as being in the corporate world, and I want to speak to some of the women in corporate, and I'd love for you to even speak to maybe a few of your clients that you're working with now. What are some of for our listeners? What are some of the what's bubbling up for your clients? What are some of the flags, like the red flags coming up they should be paying attention to? Like you said, you started asking yourself, aside from your career, where are you spending your time? And if your career wasn't there, where do you want to spend your time? And that really came up for me a lot too. I defined myself as my position in corporate. That's who I was. And
Mhm.
I actually defined my value to that. It's very dangerous to do that. But I think that's very common. I don't think I'm alone. So are you seeing that come up for your clients? And if women are feeling that way, what can they do?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so everything is turned upside down right now,
Oh,
right? With not only with what we're going through this week, but 7, 8, 9 months of, in some cases, homeschooling and working
yeah.
from home. Like the whole routine has been turned on its head. So I think the first thing is trying to find some solid footing, to carve out a little bit of quiet. Like we all had our routines. I know for me, when I commuted to work and I was in my car, I knew I at least had an hour a day where it was my time.
Me
And
too.
I could shut the world. It doesn't happen anymore. Right now I walk 20 yards down and I'm in my office, right?
Yeah.
So that's it. So I think the quiet, or even though people didn't think about that, there were opportunities to connect with their still, I call it the still point, with their inner wisdom, and at least to be able to hear and to know when things were getting off track. They may or may not have done anything for that, but that ability has been taken away. So I think part of it is, how do I just get some solid footing? That's number one. And then the second thing is this idea of purpose. I know I've struggled with that word a lot as well, because it's such a big thing. Like, what is my purpose in this world? How do we start to deconstruct that, to do things that make us feel more like ourselves? And that's the place we want to get to, but it's hard for people to take those steps if they don't know what that is. And so it took me years until my purpose became evident. I didn't even know, and it's still evolving, right? It's not, I don't think you ever get to a place of like, I found my purpose. It's like you walk towards something that feels in alignment with, you use the word values, great word, that's in alignment with your values. You're walking towards something. So there's a quote that I love by a poet named Antonio Machado. And he says, path maker, there is no path. You make the path by walking. By walking, you make the path. And so when I start to work with clients, it's like, well, let's just start to take some steps that feel okay, that feel grounding, that feel nourishing in some way. You don't have to understand what that is. Let's just start. And then we can talk about it, we can unpack it, and we can start to take bigger steps, but it starts with really small ones. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, and I know this is a theme of yours as well, is permission, right?
Mhm.
How do we give ourselves permission to dream in a different way that's not aligned to what we're told we need to do? I think the biggest surprise for me, and I help my clients see this in their lives as well, there were so many parallels in my corporate life to my life now, from a business experience perspective that I never made the connection, because you're out there fighting the good fight. You're trying to deliver, you're trying to execute, you want to put your best foot forward, and you don't realize all of these experiences, they're all going into, your toolkit, and you can draw on this toolkit. So the permission actually comes from trying to make those connections of, okay, I'm doing this thing, whatever I'm doing now, for a reason. How do I actually start to take some of these experiences and make them relevant? So it's not just, I'm going to quit my job and, buy a van and go traveling. Like, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. It can be parallel. You can have a side hustle. You can have a side joy. It doesn't even have to be a hustle. And just find ways to open up the dimensions in your life and see what unfolds from that. I think purpose and permission come through action. If there's one soundbite that I can leave, it would be that.
I love that. Purpose and permission come through action.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's so true, when you're in the world in corporate, it feels as if you're, the overworked, the trying to please everyone or get, reach this deadline. That's the one thing that it seems so far away from me now, because we've been gone for so long. I've been gone for a couple of years. So it seems like way in the past, right? To remember what it was like to have, all those deadlines. And I have deadlines in my company now, and things that I put on myself that I want to have finished, but it's just so different. It's so different in walking down the path through doing something that lights you up. And when we talk about purpose, last week this came up on our podcast, and the conversation was, how do I know what my purpose is? Some women struggle with, how do I know even how to find that? And there were a couple good nuggets that came out of that. One was, and I say this quite often, what could you do day in and day out that lights you up? You really never feel tired. You just feel energized from it. It fuels you, and it's something you just naturally love to do. That's one clue. Another one is listen to what other people are saying, and complimenting you on what you're really great at too, right? So we don't necessarily always allow those compliments from other people to land and then, stay there and reflect on those. If someone says, over and over again, wow, you're a really great artist. Wow, you draw really well. Wow, if they're saying that, but you're like, I could never be an artist. Well, a lot of people are saying you're drawing really well. Is this something you've always wanted to do? How could you start drawing? What could you draw for? And start looking into that path if that's something that you want to do. And kind of for me in the past, it was community, building community and bringing people together, and kind of getting everybody on the same page and bringing people together, and that was what helped translate into building a community for Lead Up for Women. So how can we, and you said we have a toolbox, how can we take those tools and skills that we've learned, and how could we, if you're happy with what you're doing, right, it doesn't mean you leave corporate America, but I believe that you could set boundaries much better than we do today. So let's talk a little bit about that,
Sure. Yeah. I just like to comment on just before we leave that topic,
Let's go back.
because something just came to mind. One of the biggest surprises in going on my own was I didn't realize how good the freedom, because you kind of alluded to that, of the freedom of schedule. So like you said, it's not that we don't have deadlines. It's not that we're not working hard, but the freedom to do things when you want to, and to be able to integrate it better into your life. That was such a blessing and a relief. Like, I had and that frees up energy. Like, it kind of feeds on itself. So the more of a taste you get of that, the more energetic you get about doing what you want to do. So that was just something. That was one surprise. The other surprise was it took me a while to get out of the corporate mindset, because when you're in corporate, you're expected to have the answer. When is it going to be done? How are you going to do it? How much is it going to cost? Whatever the answers are. When you go out on your own, you need to give yourself, comes back to permission, the permission of not having the answer, but to have an intuitive feel of, you know what? I'm going to continue walking down this path anyway, because I just feel called to be able to do that. That's a hard thing to teach. That's something that has to come through experience. But in giving advice to the folks that are looking for their purpose, what I found, and I can only connect the dots now that I'm looking back, it wasn't obvious to me, when I was trying to search for it. But a friend of mine said, look back to your experiences in corporate and see when you were kind of in that flow state, right? So it doesn't have to mean that you felt lit up by the work, but that time evaporated when you were engaged in it. And the one time I was able to find that was I had created an enterprise risk management framework for the company that I worked for. And every day I would drive to work and say, I know I need to do X. I have no idea how I'm going to do that. And there was such energy in that, even though I felt nauseous most of the time, there was so much creativity that I normally didn't have a chance to experience in my corporate job. So I'm reflecting back on that. That's the way I wanted to feel. The crazy thing about that was the thought process that I used to create that framework. I used to create the framework for wellness. It was the same idea of how do we find the things how do we want to feel from a wellness perspective? How do we create an action plan? How do we monitor that action plan? So there are more parallels than you think. If you can give yourself permission not to have the answers, to feel led in the places that you feel led, and to reflect back on where you had those glimmers and just allow those to kind of emerge, I think will be very surprising for a lot of folks that just kind of feel stuck.
Yeah. Oh, great advice. Great advice. And I can't say enough because it's a feeling and Kathy and I both feel it. So anyone who has left corporate, time and freedom of schedule is beyond, to me, like so much more important almost. To me, it's a currency, my time. And I do a gratitude every morning, and it's always in my gratitude every morning. I'm so thankful for my freedom of time.
Yeah.
And I literally just, I think, just exuberate this freedom of time because it was the one thing that was a dramatic shift for me that I value so much today.
Mhm.
And so it's like trying to tell a mother who's pregnant what it's going to be like to be a mom if she's never been a mom. I can't tell you until you're in a different position and you
Right.
have that freedom of time, then
Right.
you'll understand it. But I do believe this. Many of us, because of the shutdown in March, have now experienced some freedom of
Mhm.
time that we haven't experienced in the past. And once you get a taste of it, it's like crack.
Right.
And then you become addicted to it and want more
Yeah.
of it. So I believe that corporations are going to shift and change quite a bit from the way that they've operated in the past to the way that their employees are needing, by default of what's happening with lockdowns. I'm functioning today with homeschooling their children and needing to be in the home and doing what they need to do in the home, taking care of the family more so than they were before, and doing their work. And I think they're finding that they could do it in less time.
Absolutely. And I would tell you those shifts were there. Having worked for a human capital management company, we were seeing the rise of the gig economy, right? So the
Yes.
folks that were able to work, the 1099 workers. Deloitte came out with a study. They do it every year on workforce and the future of work. And what they were finding, and this happened in May, so we were just in the beginnings of the pandemic, what was most important to workers, and it really was that freedom, that flexibility. How do I have that ability to be able to homeschool my kids and get my work done? Like, just give me a little bit of flexibility in my day and I will deliver what needs to be delivered. And we're finding that companies are investing. We say January now is the new July is the new January. Like, there's been a shift on when people are actually going to be able to get back into the workplace, and by that time I think we will have a whole new way of working. So the pandemic was an accelerator of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so to be able to get a taste of that crack, as you put it, like you get force fed, and then suddenly it's just like, you know what, this is working for me. How can I continue
Yeah.
to work? And we may find people that would rather have that kind of a situation than going out on their own. And that's great too. Right. So more choices. You can't go wrong with more
Yeah.
choices.
Right. Yeah. And really, isn't that what it's about? It's not about making the choice to leave corporate and everyone's kissing corporate goodbye and ditching it and going on their own? Do I feel that people are maybe feeling drawn to starting their own business right now? Absolutely. I'm sure the percentages are higher, and people are feeling that. Are there opportunities for them to be able to do that? Absolutely. I mean, with the funding's been leveraged, there's great opportunity for them to do that right now. But if you really enjoy your job and you love what you do, but you're feeling overworked, that's why Kathy's here today, to some of the practices that she puts in place with her clients to assist them that are in that world of corporate in creating and setting those boundaries, right? Giving yourself permission to set those boundaries, because we do allow, I believe, for people to step over those boundaries because we're not really sure where that line is and where that boundary is for us to be able to say no.
Right.
And we tend not to work on or practice the word no. So, Kathy, let's talk a little bit about that. In how, if you're working in corporate and you're doing this kind of maybe half in a couple days a week or all home or whatever it is, but you're still now maybe okay. Now maybe you're working. If you don't have any children, I have no children at home, so now, what used to be driving in, working the hours, driving home, I'm extended, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, but I could go 12 hours a day,
Yeah.
13 hours a day. So many of you now may be working longer hours, and it's a more of a burden for you because you have children at home, or maybe you're older and you don't have any children at home. What could we help with the overworked professionals that now are essentially overworking themselves?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think we fall into that category too. There's nobody to tell me to close the laptop anymore, right? So they're really, the boundaries, you mentioned the word boundaries before, they really do become incredibly important. But we're in a brave new world. So the answers are going to be different than they were 7, 8 months ago. So I think I would really start, there's a mindful self-compassion practice that starts with the question, what do I need right now? Right. So I would, and there are some moments, I know when I was at my busiest, at my most stressed in my corporate job, I would start, which is the way I started my morning this morning. I don't always do this, but today seemed like one of those days, but I would start my mornings. I would set my alarm for 5 minutes and I would close my eyes. I would put my hand over my heart. I'd close my eyes and say very mindfully, for the next 5 minutes, nobody needs you and you do not need to make a decision. I just gave myself that space. I could only afford 5 minutes back in those days. So I would never suggest that somebody sit on a meditation cushion for 20 minutes. Like, I know that that's just not workable, but you can also do that on an airplane. You can do that on a long walk to the ladies' room. It doesn't, you could do it while you step outside and look up at the night sky. Just that check-in of, I'm giving myself, call it 2 minutes. 2 minutes, nobody needs me. I don't need to make a decision, and just be in that space. That's always a great place to start. Reason being is that spaces like that tend to expand, and you may find that over time you need a little bit of more of that. Also, the question of what do I need right now? It's not what everybody else needs in this situation. So I know in the early parts of the pandemic, when we were in lockdown, there seemed to be two camps of people who were completely overwhelmed and needed to binge on Netflix, which was fine. That was a way of coping. And others that are like, I'm going to clean out my closets and I'm going to go organize. Like, there were these two different, and now there's more of a spectrum as we've been living in this longer. So regardless of what other people are doing, what people in your house are doing, your family, your friends, what do you need? What would be most nourishing? And how do you gift that to yourself, even if it's only for a few minutes a day? For some, it may be healthy food. For me, it's been a walk in the afternoon, and I make myself go because I'm involved in something. I don't want to stop, but I make myself go for that walk. And I will tell you, when you do that habitually, you will find that when you click on that right thing, you never come back and say, boy, I wish I didn't do that. Like, I never come back from those walks and go, boy, I wish I didn't take that walk. It was like, oh, thankfully. It shifts your perspective. So how can you shift that? What is that for you? It may be listening to music. It may be exercising. Whatever that thing may be, how do you find yourself? How do you give that to yourself, even if it's in small increments?
Yeah, Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey talked about that a lot in the Seven
Mhm.
Habits of
The
Highly
big
Effective
rocks.
People. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I love when he would talk about sharpening the saw. You can't cut down an entire forest with one saw. And he said, if you were in a competition and you had to cut down a tree in 4 hours, would you spend 4 hours cutting down the tree or 3 hours sharpening the saw? And then you cut it in an hour, right? To
Right.
have the sharpest saw. So we're just like that. We need to sharpen our minds and give ourselves space and
Yes.
step back. And it's the same. If my alarm goes off at 6 a.m. to go to a workout or to work out, it's like, oh, gotta get up and work out. But I've never ever after a workout said I never should have done that. It was the
Exactly.
worst decision ever, right? I'm like, I'm
Exactly.
so glad I got up. I feel so much better because just that movement of in our bodies or stepping away and breathing, and breathing out the anxiety or breathing out the frustration or breathing, just giving yourself time to think. It's such
Right.
a valuable piece
Right.
that's not practiced as often as it needs to be.
Right. And
And
all of those things, what they all have in common is that it's a place where you can come truly as yourself.
yeah,
Right. So if you're breathing in the middle of a workout, it's very primal. You're just being you. If you're looking out up at the sky, or if you're on a long walk in nature, you're outside of yourself, but you're being who you truly are. And I think that's what's so nourishing about
yeah.
any of those practices. Yeah.
It's all you've got is you,
That's
you
right.
are all that you. And so the more you just bring you out, that's the other thing. I tried to be something for everybody in the corporate world. And when I finally decided, screw that, I'm just going to be who I am and do the best at what I can do of who I am, it became easier. I felt freer. And then that was when I realized this isn't for me.
Right.
That was when I really realized I need to make a change in my life because I started focusing on what it was that I wanted and who I was.
Yeah.
And we only have one life,
We do. And I think that's
you know?
part of the reason why some folks don't change. And whatever the transition is, it could be a professional transition, it could be a personal one.
Mhm.
What's so scary about that space is that the truth really does bubble up.
Yeah,
And sometimes we're not ready for that. And
right.
so if there is that sense of I'm stepping into that space, I'm not really liking that, it's okay to allow yourself to step back too. This is
Yeah,
all about kindness and it's all
yeah,
about self-compassion. Like
yeah,
how do you give yourself the support
mhm,
as we're going through difficult times, both collectively and
yeah,
individually.
yeah.
And when we do have the strength, how do we give ourselves that space to move forward and to move forward, even if it's a little scary to go forward? How do we actually take that step? How do we support ourselves in doing that?
Yeah, and I love that you said, I might just change the title of this because I love that you said it's a brave new world, and it is. And how do we activate your freedoms? How do we activate our freedoms? And really that's what we're talking about today is how do you activate your freedoms and your freedoms for taking care of yourself with wellness, your freedom of space, your freedom of boundaries, your freedom of permission. And it is a different world and it will never be the same world that it ever was before.
Correct.
So for anyone that thinks it's just going to end and we're going to go back to normal, that doesn't exist anymore. When something new happens in the world, it never goes back to the way it was. So this is the way that the world's moving forward. So how do you navigate yourself through that world?
Yeah.
You know.
Early on, probably in April, Martha Beck, the life coach, I heard her speak and she was likening the pandemic to a tidal wave.
Mm,
Right. So this tidal wave came in, it destroyed all of the old structures. So this idea of this wave that's coming in. She also offered, as the wave comes in, you do have the option to get up on a surfboard and to learn how to navigate, how to harness that momentum to
mm,
move yourself forward. So where you land is actually in a new place. And I love that image
mm,
of there's nothing you can do about rising water. The water is going to do what water does.
mm,
How do we ourselves change to be able to meet that in a way that we can harness that momentum and use it to help us either to hold us up like salt water can, or to
mhm,
be able to ride that energy. And
yeah,
I the more I think about that, the more wisdom I see in that there's always opportunity when we have these kinds of this kind of disruption, either in business. I mean, that's how business grows, right? You're seeing opportunity in the disruption, and it's the same thing with personal. We just don't see it on such a mass scale
Yeah.
very often, and that's what we're experiencing.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I do think it's exciting, and there's a lot of changes in the world happening right now. And we can either, embrace it and figure out how it works for us moving forward, or we can choose to um, sink,
Right.
in the wave. And I don't think anyone wants to be there. But that's why community is important and reaching out for others to help you too.
Well, I was just going to say it would be, I do want to mention that there are a lot of folks that really are suffering.
Yeah.
Either they've been ill or they're on the front lines, and so
Mhm.
part of the privilege that we have to be able to do the work that we do is that we're not doing that, and I'm also keep that in mind too, and that's part of the practice as well. Right, to think about everything that we have in our lives and all of the effort collectively that allows us to live the lives that we live.
Yeah.
And so just showing that you have your gratitude practice, in the mornings, of just including them in this circle of
Yeah.
thanks and gratitude of the people that are fighting the good fight on our behalf and also have been impacted, and sending our blessings to them as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thankful for all of them for what they do. So, Kathy, tell us about your book and how we can find your book,
Sure.
and how our listeners can reach out to you. Of course, anyone listening now, we'll have all of Kathy's information uploaded on Facebook. It'll also be right here at the tip of your fingertips. You can just grab her information and get it loaded. And you can go find her book right away. But it's a great read, and I recommend it to anyone who feels like an overworked professional,
Yeah, I had
which
a
is
little bit of
probably most of
experience
us.
there, without a doubt. So I think in a nutshell, I really wanted to share my wellness. It's a methodology and a philosophy. So it's not, do these 5 things and you'll get X. This is meant to be, sharing the experience that I feel more fit in my mid 50s than I did in my mid 30s. So what happened over those 20 years while I was working full time, while I was commuting into Manhattan? Like, what happened over that time to make this wellness journey continue on an upward trajectory? That's kind of what the book is about. But it really helps readers connect or reconnect in some cases with their mind, body, and spirit, because it's a holistic approach to wellness.
Mhm.
And the principles that we go through are self-compassion. So how do we treat ourselves with acceptance
Yeah.
for the places that we are, and the ability and the patience to get to where we want to go to? It's an individual journey for everybody. How to uncover our deep soul level motivation for why lifestyle changes may need to be made. So what is that emotional why? Because that's what gets us out of bed in the morning to make these change and to continue on that path. How to show up for ourselves consistently and with optimism and enthusiasm, because that's really, when we talk about what lights us up, that's what's underneath, the big smiles and the light behind the eye, right? It's the enthusiasm and the optimism
Mhm.
for what's to come. How to create a customized self-care plan, and then how to create a support system to continue with the success. So those are the basic principles, the tools. There's a holistic wellness spectrum that I had created that shows that spectrum from not only the body of eating right and moving, but how do we actually stay in flow? How do we connect? How do we contemplate? How do we include all of this into what I call a well-lived life? So how does it all come to fruition, and what are the practices that a busy professional can do that don't take a long time but are very impactful for them? And a lot of it is writing or brief meditations. Like I said, that you don't need a meditation cushion or a practice to be able to do them. And also things that I call positive actions. What are the things that we can do to put these types of principles into play that we can see the outcome? And
Mhm.
that's the basic premise of the book.
Oh, I love it. Well, Kathy, thank you so much for being with us today. This conversation was more than I expected. I loved it. It was great. I think we've given some really great tips for anyone listening, and really, even if it's just getting them, just moved to want to just start thinking about, am I overworking myself? do I apply wellness to what it is that I'm doing? Am I taking care of myself? We've only got one life and one body. And so we really need to take care of it the best that we can. And then the more our cups are full, the more they'll run over and we can serve others too. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to just remind everyone that next week's guest is Dr. Lori Monaco, really good friend of mine. She's a chiropractor and the founder of Align Yourself, which is perfect for what it is that she does. But, she's the new weight loss doctor. She talks a lot about ChiroThin, how it has just transformed her entire life with the weight loss and how she felt before and how she feels today. Again, really focusing on wellness. And then Agnes Laughlin, also, she's the founder of Miracles in Wellness. So we're talking a lot about wellness this week and next week. We need as much wellness as we can get in our lives right now. So I think it's great that we have these 2 weeks to really focus on wellness and taking care of ourselves. And so thank you again, Kathy, for being with us. And I just wanted to close the show by reminding all of you that remember, you are the only you that has ever been, and you are the only you that will ever be. Mm-hmm. So how you navigate your future, it really is up to you. So give yourself the permission to make the choices, be you, and be strong. Thank you so much for joining us today on this week's episode. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.